What a father! A Dvar Torah for Parashat Vayetze. Who was Abraham's son? Although it is technically possible to say that Abraham had several sons, and that a point can be made that Abraham's son is Ishmael, or Zimran, or Yokshan, or I think I just made another point. For the most part, the answer will be Yitzchak. This answer is emphasized in several verses in the Torah, the most prominent of which is Ve'ele toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holid et Yitzchak. And who was Yitzchak's son? Although on the one hand there are fewer people to choose from, since Yitzchak has only 2 sons, there is more room for question. The story of the Brachot is full of times when Yitzchak calls Esav his son, and not nearly as many times when he says the same to Yaakov, at least not consciously. Yaakov, on the other hand, calls him my father quite a lot, whether to his face or not. The reason this distinction matters is that if this were to happen only when Yaakov is standing in front of his father, trying to pretend he's Esav, it wouldn't really mean that much. But when it happens elsewhere, when he's speaking to his mother, for example, it should probably be taken more seriously. That's why Hashem's address to Yaakov in this week's parasha at the beginning is a bit surprising. And he said, I am Hashem, the God of Avraham your father, and the God of Yitzchak. I must say, I've studied quite a bit of Tanakh in my life, and Abraham is not Yitzchak's father. Or in the words of Rashar Hirsch, nowhere else in the scriptures have we found anything like this, that the father's father is called father, while the father himself is mentioned immediately after as a stranger. I found very few answers to this question among the early traditional Pshat commentators, therefore I expanded my search. I also tried to divide the interpretations I found into different categories, although they could have been divided otherwise. In the first category, I included Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Elazar, author of the Minchat Yehuda, 13th century France, who claims that the question does not begin. The verse should read like this: I am the God of Avraham, your father, and the God of Yitzchak. In other words, Avraham is not described as Yaakov's father, Hashem is. The second category includes those who say that the verse is trying to teach us something technical. Chizkuni explains that the Torah wants to teach that the sons of sons are like sons, meaning that a grandfather is also a kind of father. The Baal Kli Yakar adds that this is an indirect attempt to emphasize that Yitzchak is Avraham's son and not Avimelech's. I didn't quite understand what makes these verses the right place to teach these important lessons, and I don't think I'm alone. Other commentators make both these claims when explaining other verses. This doesn't, however, take away from the legitimacy of this commentary, I guess. In the third category, I'd like to mention the words of the Baal Or HaChaim, who says that the purpose here is that Avraham's blessings will continue through Yaakov and not through Esav. He bases this explanation on the words in the Gemara in Sanhedrin that Beyitzchak yikare lecha zera. Part of Yitzchak shall be your children, and not all of Yitzchak. The interesting thing about this interpretation is that it sheds light on another point in the verses, and that is that both Avraham's blessing, Hazera ve'ha'aretz, children and the land, were given to Yaakov by right and not by deception. The blessings Yitzchak intended for Esav did not include those given to Avraham. The difficulty with this interpretation is that Yitzchak gives these blessings to Yaakov earlier in the chapter, raising the question of why mention it again. I inserted 3 interpretations into the fourth category. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, in his commentary, Baal HaTurim HaKatzar, explains that the reason that Avraham is called Yaakov's father here is that both of them, Hashem introduced himself as I am Hashem, to Yaakov here and to Avraham in Brit Ben Abtarim. Rashar Hirsch claims that this is about deciding who the spiritual heir is. When Hashem tells Avraham to walk before me and be complete, this doesn't happen in Yitzchak's family, which splits completely into 2 nations, but in Yaakov's, who despite the difficulties, all children remain one family from which one nation will be formed. The Netziv says that Avraham represents faith during hardship, an attribute much more important to Yaakov when going into exile than riches, the attribute associated with Yitzchak. This is why all Yaakov asks from Hashem is protection, bread, and clothing, the most basic needs. What all these interpretations have in common is pointing out features shared by Avraham and Yaakov that are not relevant to Yitzchak. What I found most interesting about all the interpretations I mentioned until now was mainly what was missing. No commentator gave the first intuitive reason that popped into my head, which is that one chapter after Yaakov deceives Yitzchak and takes the blessings is not the ideal time to refer to Yitzchak as his father. On the other hand, perhaps the reason they didn't explain this was because one verse after being told how Yaakov got the brachot, he leaves Yitzchak Aviv, his father. They also didn't explain that Yaakov experienced parental estrangement, although throughout Perek Av Zayin, Yitzchak only addresses Esav, or whoever he thinks Esav is, with the phrase my son. Perhaps because Pasuk Yudchet, where Yitzchak asks, who are you, my son, when thinking it's Yaakov, shows that he did care about it. Whatever the reason, I'll explain differently also. Maybe Yaakov can't be considered Yitzchak's heir in this case because Yaakov leaves the land promised to Avraham that Yitzchak never left. Hashem may be saying to him, listen, I know that Yitzchak stayed all his life in this land and that I demanded that he stay, but that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to leave. After all, Avraham is also your father, and I didn't prevent him from going down to Egypt at the time of need. I might be able to prove this from the fact that the next time Yitzchak is called Yaakov's father is when he returns to Eretz Yisrael. In the same chapter, when Yaakov describes all the trials and tribulations Lavan put him through, Avraham will again be called his father and Yitzchak will not. When they swear an oath not to cross the Gilad and enter each other's territories, however, that is, an oath never to leave the land of Israel to the north again, Yitzchak will once again be called his father. Do I have any message I'm trying to spread here? Not really, except for maybe you'd like to buy my book or subscribe to my channel or something like that. There's a link below. I'm only Dovi Holtz, one who loves his father and Tanakh.